let me add to your land acknowledgement that I'm here in Minnesota, where we have the earliest and most severe air quality alert that we've ever had because of the fires coming from BC and Alberta right down to Minnesota. So we are sharing that experience with you. Um, and it's really affecting much of the continent. And indeed, when you watch the severe weather around the world, part of what's changing. So what I'm going to take you through by way of helping to synthesize our final session is what characteristics we've learned, or at least one framework for thinking about what constitutes a highly credible change initiative. This becomes important both in terms of your own sense that you're doing things that are meaningful and valid. It's important in communicating that sense of credibility and validity to other people, especially funders. Um, and that it's also a way of thinking for today about how your own change initiatives uh, manifest these characteristics and how you can incorporate um, the elements and dimensions and features of belonging matters into your own work to enhance the credibility of what you're doing, so that part of what can come out of a course like this is a better sense of how you draw upon the belonging matters framework and the utilization focused evaluation work that I've shared to enhance the credibility of your own work and initiatives. So what we're going to do is I'm going to briefly take you through 10 features that together constitute one version of what would be a credible change initiative. And then Jesse is going to illustrate those with belonging matters. And we'll give you a chance to react to them and think about your own versions of this in the work that you're doing. So the first of these features is that there's a coherent and well-conceptualized theory of change. When evaluation and program design began, it began with just articulating what goals were. And it was all about whether you're attaining your goals. And then the question became, well, not just are you attaining your goals, but how are you attaining your goals? And logic models were introduced. But then the question became, well, not just what are the steps in attaining the goals, but what's the causal mechanisms that bring about the change? And so the theory of change work, go ahead, put the next one up, comes from research to support the theory of change, both conceptualizing how does change occur that you're working on, what are the mechanisms, and the research to support that. Carol Weiss in 1995, one of our great thought leaders in evaluation, was at a conference where foundation leaders were working on anti-poverty programs, and they were sitting around making up programs and strategies for dealing with poverty. And she was aghast as a longtime social scientist who worked on these issues that they didn't know the research. And it was Carol Weiss who introduced the article that we would say these days went viral in 1995. There's nothing as practical as a good theory. And she really introduced theory of change into the expectation that that's what would be a part of the work that goes on, both articulating it and having the research to support it and be able to identify what that research is. The next item is that there is evaluation support for the approach, both evaluation within your own experience, but evaluation of other programs that are similar, that provide evidence of effectiveness. That leads then to the fourth element, which is practitioner experience and testimony, that practitioners are able to express their experience with this. So we've got a coherent theory of change supported by research, supported by evaluation, and now supported by practitioner experience, which leads then to the model being supported by experts who have a broad knowledge in how change occurs. And that then leads to the practitioner or participant experience that tells us that the approach is scalable. That is, it can work in multiple settings and multiple ways, scaling out, scaling to different settings, scaling up to other levels. That becomes part of what's expected with a credible change initiative. The next item is that it can address systems change and transformation, so that we've moved from simply doing projects and figuring out if their goals are getting attained and the logic models work, to now understanding that change initiatives need to deal with systems change and transformation. And that's very different than simply project outcomes. To a major shift in the last decade to realizing that projects don't change systems. Systems change is a different animal. And to understand the nature of systems, systemic thinking, complexity theory brings us into that element of a credible change initiative these days. The next element is that there's actually guidance on how to do it. So a lot of this so far is fairly conceptual, but it gets down to then that out of the research, out of the practitioner experience and expert knowledge and evaluation comes practical guidance on how to do it. And that's a lot of what we've tried to cover in the course. The next element is identifying the capacity needs that are going to be needed to be able to do it. And finally, the final element is it's grounded in vision and values for a more equitable and sustainable world, that the values that are manifest for systems change and transformation explicitly relate to equitable, sustainable for humans and all living beings. So this is one kind of framework. It's like a Michelin star rating that instead of having 3 stars or 5 stars has 10 stars. And if you have all of these elements together, you have a highly credible, useful, and validated change initiative. To illustrate what that looks like, going to have Jesse take us through what that looks like from the Belonging Matters perspective, both the way in which that approach has evolved over the last 20 years and the ways in which you can incorporate Belonging Matters into your own work. Before she does that, let me stop and see if you have any questions about any of these 10. I went through them very quickly. Jesse's going to illustrate them, but if something has come up for you, go ahead and raise your hand or come off mute. Or
I have a question.
yes,
Can you speak to the linear versus iterative nature of these features?
it includes both. It's a great question. So that you see that the initial conceptualization of a theory of change and the work that began around all of that was typically fairly linear. And theories of change are often their causal models fairly linear. But you see, we've added in addressing systems change and transformation. And in a way, the way I think about that, and I really appreciate the question, Andrew Lisa, is that systems change involves both some small elements that are like projects that fit together into a bigger systems change picture. So that when you're doing something like developmental evaluation, which is aiming at changing systems, we have to be able to take apart the elements of which that's made a part of, what the different players are doing, what the different theories of change that go together to make up a transformational theory. And so each of those may have some shorter term linear features, but together, when you look at the interactions across those efforts, that's where we're dealing with systems and the interdependence of those different elements together.